Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We will start this event, which is the public event of the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women. I wish to welcome all those of you who are joining us today in person, but also all those who are following us on Zoom. This event will be mostly in Spanish, but we will have a couple of interventions in English. So for those of you who are following us from other countries in other languages, we will provide simultaneous interpretation in English. So whoever is following us on Zoom right now may turn on the simultaneous interpretation option at the bottom of your screen and choose the language of your preference.
Pues de la red de Zoom. So I'm going to say this in English very briefly for those who connect with us through Zoom. We will have a simultaneous translation, so please use the tool for translation in the Zoom room.
Hello, let me introduce myself. I am Diana Guzmán. I am the Director of Dejusticia, which is the Center on Rights, Law, and Society, which is a think tank located here in Bogota, Colombia. And we are one of the convening organizations for this event, and we have been supporting the work of the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women. I am in charge today, and I'm very honored to be the moderator of this space, which is not only very important for coordination, but also fundamental to position the voices of women and also underline the huge value in the work of formerly incarcerated women in order to open new spaces for reflection and collective action. I would like to start telling you why it makes sense to create an international network of formerly incarcerated women. Well, basically, it comes from an empirical fact. Over the last few years, there has been an alarming increase in the rate of incarcerated women around the world. The latest edition of the World Female Imprisonment List, which has been published, shows that the number of women and girls in prison throughout the world has increased by 60% since the year 2000. Of course, one could say, well, this is part of a general punitive trend in which we are worldwide. But actually, when you compare that with the growth in the rate of the incarceration of men, well, clearly there is an imbalance. That rate for women has increased by 60%, while for men it has increased by 22% only, which clearly calls for the need to reflect on the intersection that there is between the prison system and gender issues. In Latin America, the situation is not very different. If we exclude the United States, we consider that there are today 95,000 women behind bars in the Americas, compared to 37,671 in the year 2000, which means that the increase has been by more than 150% in less than 2 decades. This data shows us the importance of strengthening these coordination spaces between women who are formerly incarcerated. Incarceration of women is mostly driven by punitive laws on drugs and iron fist policies that disproportionately affect women. In most Latin American countries, drug offenses are the main cause of feminine incarceration, and the percentage of women incarcerated due to these offenses is almost greater than that of men. So this international network is a space where women share their experiences, but also their advocacy strategies. And based on that, the purpose was to put together an action plan to work together, trying to put an end to the incarceration of women and girls throughout the world. This space today is the closing event of this 2-day meeting. And this network will tell Colombia and the world what those 2 days of work were about and what is their projection for the future. So I wanted to tell you briefly what are the convening organization? Of course, the network itself, but we must mention the Corporación Mujeres Libres, which is an organization consisting of people who identify themselves as women and who were formerly incarcerated. They do wonderful work in Colombia, and they coordinate different initiatives locally and internationally as well. We also have the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, which was created in 2010 in a federal prison in the United States. Another convening organization is WOLA, the Washington Office on Latin America, which is a leader organization in research and advocacy, which promotes human rights in the Americas. And lastly, Dejusticia, the organization that I chair, which is think tank on legal and social studies based in Bogota. So we will have 5 different moments during this event. The opening will be in the hands of Senator María José Pizarro, whom I will give the floor to shortly. Then we will watch the video of Angela Davis, where she recognizes the importance of this kind of initiatives. And then the most expected moment is, of course, the presentation of the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women. Afterwards, we will look at a presentation regarding the results and what has happened in terms of the public service utility law in Colombia. And we will give the floor to the Ministry of Justice of Colombia and also the network. This will allow us to understand why it makes sense to put together such an event in Colombia right now. And lastly, the closing, which will host a symbolic event. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Senator María José Pizarro Rodríguez, who is with us today to say a few words of opening. Maybe some of you don't know her. María José is a political leader, peace activist, and a memory activist. She has dedicated her work and effort to recuperate the memory of the country, and especially the story of Carlos Pizarro, who was the leader of the M19 guerrilla movement, who was assassinated after signing peace agreements in 1990. She worked at the Bogota Office for Culture and the National Center for Historic Memory, and she has worked with communities on the design, implementation, and coordination of programs for the participation and the rights of victims and public policies for reparation and memory. Commemorative actions as well as, of course, the construction of memory. She is a senator and member of the Historic Pact movement. Senator, you have the floor. Well, first of all, greetings and a big hug to you all. I am extremely happy to be here. We were thinking that maybe I was not going to make it. We had come up with several strategies that would allow me to attend, but I want to tell you that I am now part of the delegation of the national government in the negotiations with the National Liberation Army, the ELN guerrilla. So I should be sitting at the table in the 3rd negotiation cycle in Havana. But of course, there are engagements here. And one of the engagements in Colombia is actually to push for a draft law, which is very important for President Gustavo Petro, and which I am coordinating as a presenter and leader. But before I talk about this draft law, I want first of all to tell you, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Mujeres Libres Corporation and all the convening organizations at this forum for inviting me. But I talk about the Mujeres Libres Corporation because we carried out a visit which changed our lives. And we were committed with this draft law, but of course, that was before I knew that I was going to be the leader of such draft law. But we basically went with the Corporación Mujeres Libres on a visit to the Buen Pastor women's prison in Bogota. I had never been there before, but my cousin, who is like my sister, was born in that prison. When my aunt was arrested in 1979, the first days of the year of 1979, she was pregnant. She was taken to the northern part of the prison. I'll just give you a couple of elements of context because some of you are not from Colombia and you probably want to understand what I am talking about. She was detained for being a member of the M19 movement, which was a guerrilla movement in Colombia. My parents were also activists of that M19 movement. And at the time in 1978, after an action that was carried out by the M19 movement, a prosecution, a restless prosecution was unleashed against this guerrilla movement, activists, but also anyone who was close or relatively close to the M19 movement was detained, and many searches and house warrants and arrest warrants were carried out during that time. And many important people in the country went in exile, including Gabriel Garcia Marquez himself, because someone had said that he belonged to the M19. So at the time, not only my aunt was detained, but also my mother and my father were both arrested and detained in the municipality of Alto Nogales in the department of Santander in the north of Colombia. And they were then transferred to the Cimitarra military base, where my parents, together with other colleagues, were tortured by the military during 23 days. We thought that they were dead, but actually they were transferred. My mother was transferred to the Bucaramanga women's prison, and my dad to the prison of La Picota here in the south of Bogota. My aunt had been detained a few days before, was transferred to the Buen Pastor women's prison. The military hospital was where she gave birth to my cousin. And the first years of my life, really, since really my first childhood memories, what I remember is going to that jail, that Buen Pastor women's prison, with everything that this entails for, of course, the relatives of people inside. As my mother was in prison in Bucaramanga, I had to go once a month when that was possible, because sometimes, of course, our economic possibilities did not allow for that, but I had to go visit my mother, who was jailed in different conditions than that of my father, because in Bucaramanga, the political prisoners were all in the same yard with the with other convicts, while men were in a specific yard for political prisoners. So once a month, and I know you know what I'm talking about. I was hoping that this would have changed and that perhaps the system would have changed now, but actually it has not. It seems once a month, when my father was in Bogota, I was able to go more often to the prison of La Picota to visit him, and we would go visit my father. So I remember the long queues, which still thousands of families, mothers, children do every day to visit their relatives, and all the searchers to be able to get into the jail. At the time, there was a specific yard for psychiatric patients. They called it the yard of the crazy people. And the guards had to walk right in the middle of the alley, because if they got close to any of the doors, they could be caught by one of the convicts who were inside. And it was really scary to walk in that corridor in the yard. And I was 5 years old finally when my parents were freed, my mother for finishing her sentence, and my dad due to an amnesty. And This reminds me of the fact that Vice Minister of Justice Umaña, is the son of the lawyer, Mr. Umaña, who would defend my father. And we often spent afternoons with Eduardo Umaña. He would take us to the park while my grandmother was going to the prison in order to visit my father. So these are my first memories. Actually, the childhood memory is so incredible, one could say, that one evening, I don't know why, they allowed me to stay with my mother in prison. And on the bunk bed, I was seeing, believing that I was seeing like a beautiful bed, like the bed of a princess with veils and colors. But of course, now that I remember it, it was, of course, not a beautiful bed. They were just putting these pieces of cloth in order to have a little bit of privacy around their bunk. And so I think it has given me a kind of sensitivity, a memory that means that I have very special links, and I've had to think very deeply about life in jail. Even though these memories are childhood memories from, back in the day and at the end of the 70s, and I was hoping, of course, that the conditions would have changed and that the spaces that we visited as children would have changed and that the conditions of the people deprived of liberty inside the prisons would have changed. But sadly, that visit we carried out with Mujeres Libres revealed that the situation not only has not improved, but it has actually worsened a lot. In the last few years, we are not only facing huge overcrowding, but also, and I'm sure you know everything about that, I don't have anything to teach you, but the conditions are degrading, are subhuman, dehumanizing, and truly terrible treatment that is not dignified at all, and not only for the persons who are inside, but also for their families and relatives. So President Gustavo Petro was actually saying it today. He was saying it in Spain, actually, because he is now on a state visit in Spain. For him, prisons should be a sort of university. We are really taking an opposite stance to other models that are being developed in Latin America. One is truly of concern, is the case of President Bukele in Salvador. So we really want to try and change things and take a totally different position. I think, well, my time is up. I won't be able to speak about the draft law so much, but what we seek is basically to reform the system and to move towards a restorative justice proposal that puts victims at the center, where we find humanizing paths and also be respectful of the Constitution. As you know, the Constitution seeks to provide reinsertion into society and be a part of society without having suffered an eternal and endless sentence, and that prisons end up being like revolving doors. You come out and you go back in, and this only just feeds into the system of imprisonment. We want to push for this draft law because we believe that this contributes to peace building in our country. It helps humanizing us as a society, understand ourselves, and we want to overcome this punitive logic. The justice of our country is characterized by more crime, longer sentences, and more hurdles in the justice system that makes processes too slow. And so we must reform that so that we can make sure that the justice system truly protects the rights of victim, but also the rights of human beings who are incarcerated. So that's all for me. I just wanted to tell you that we are here with you, committed. We really embrace you, and we have put my seat as a senator at your disposal to push for this draft law, but also to support many other reforms for Colombian society. Thank you and congratulations for taking part in this event. Congratulations to the colleagues of our country, the corporations and NGOs that have supported this event. And of course, congratulations. And you can definitely count on my mobilization and my conviction to fight for human dignity. Thank you. Thank you very much, María José, for your words, which truly remind us of one of the fundamental reasons why it's fundamental to talk about reforms of the penitentiary and prison system, which is your own experience. So this puts in perspective the fact that we must reflect on that based on rights. I would now like to show the video by Angela Davis, who is a feminist, an activist, and a professor at the University of California in Santa Cruz.
Greetings to you all, my formerly incarcerated sisters. A shout out to Andrea James from the National Council of Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls in the US, and a special shout out to Debbie Kilroy from Sisters Inside in Australia. I thank and honor all of you who have come together from all over the world. Let me tell you that I deeply regret that I cannot join you in person in Bogota for the first international convening of formerly incarcerated women. But I promise you that I am not only there virtually through this message, but I am also there in spirit. And so I thank the initiators and sponsors of this important and long overdue forum. The Colombian NGOs, Dejusticia and Mujeres Libres, the Washington Office on Latin America, the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and the Colombian Ministry of Justice. I understand that I am now speaking to more than 50 formerly incarcerated women from some 20 countries around the world who were present at the forum and who have determined, together with their constituencies, to collectively bring an end to the incarceration of women and girls in the world. This is a mission that requires audacity, perseverance, clarity of intention, and very importantly, an abolitionist rather than reformist approach. This mission embodies the understanding that the goal of abolishing jails and prisons for women is an integral part of the larger abolitionist effort to create a world where racism no longer determines who lives in freedom and who lives behind bars. A world that prioritizes housing, healthcare, and education for all. A world that is no longer structured in accordance with the needs and desires of the wealthy. A world in which racism and carceral approaches to social problems will have become obsolete. I congratulate you all for coming together in Bogota, Colombia, where the new government, under the leadership of President Gustavo Petro and Vice President Francia Marquez Mina, is currently attempting to grapple with the prison crisis that has been ongoing in Colombia over the last decades. For far too long, the problems associated with over-incarceration in the world largely have been represented as problems primarily affecting men. Women's incarceration in most places in the world has been seen as a minor issue since proportionately fewer women and gender nonconforming people than men have comprised and continue to comprise the imprisoned population. Radical feminists, that is to say, anti-racist, anti-capitalist feminists, argue that this is a narrow and simplistic logic that does not take into consideration the complex realities that are camouflaged by numbers. There may be many more men in prison than women, but when women are imprisoned, as we well know, not only children, but families, and indeed also entire communities inevitably bear the brunt of their incarceration. Moreover, the charges for which women are most often sent to prison are related to drugs or property. And if they are charges for offenses involving violence, it is most often the case that the women in question have tried to respond to and protect themselves from the violence they have suffered at the hands of partners. Instead of trying to address the pressing global problem of gender violence, which is the most widespread form of violence in the world, the very women who are the targets of that violence are rendered scapegoats and are compelled to carry the full burden of global gender violence. Women also carry the burden of the global tendency toward building more places of incarceration, including immigrant detention facilities and juvenile facilities. They are the majority of those who suffer collateral consequences of incarceration while still being counted among those who inhabit the free world. The international network of formerly incarcerated women is in the vanguard of social justice movements precisely because you recognize that given the interconnected economic, political, and social structures that characterize our time, it is incumbent on us to develop strategies of social justice that are also global in scope. You are enlivening the internationalism that has long inspired workers and radical women all over the planet, and more recently, such formations as international LGBTQ movements and international movements to rescue the environment. Because the rising number of jails and prisons for women reveals deep connections with global capitalism and with the flows of human beings across national borders who are looking to escape the poverty that is generated and intensified by capitalism. It is especially important for us to create international strategies to challenge the continuing rise of jails and prisons for women, and to challenge the structural racism linked to this process. As a formerly incarcerated woman myself, I express deep solidarity with you and much gratitude to all of you who are determined to end the incarceration of women and girls in the world, and indeed to abolish carceral institutions that not only produce and reproduce so much racism heteropatriarchy, repression, and suffering, but prevent us from discovering creative abolitionist methods of radically restructuring our societies so that they no longer have to turn to violence and repression and racism and heteropatriarchy. You are in the vanguard of the global effort to rebuild our world on new foundations that emphasize happiness, health, and true security for all. I wish you much success in your deliberations.
Well, it's marvelous and inspiring to start with these words, both the senator as Professor Angela Davis, and even more wonderful to give way to this third moment of our day, which is precisely to introduce our honorable stars for the space. I want to introduce people that will be in charge of the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women. I have great Claudia Cardona, the director of Mujeres Libres Corporation. Claudia does not need to be introduced, but for those that are connected to the event online, I want to share with you that she is a psychologist with academic training in the defense of human rights and great commitment with the promotion and defense of human rights. She's the chair of Mujeres Libres Corporation, women that were imprisoned, and she was imprisoned since she left jail. Her work has been in advocating for the freedom of women that are still incarcerated, and of course, formerly incarcerated women. Claudia will give a brief introduction, and then we are going to introduce 6 representatives of the network that will talk about her experiences these days, her conversations, and her strategies for resistance, their strategies for resistance. I want to invite my 6 colleagues so that they can sit up here. They are all representatives of this network. Please step up. We want to invite Anna Tonine, Tricia Walsh, and Debbie Kilroy, Valerie Summer, Susan Kibula, Andrew James, and Rosna Carlina. A big show of hands for them, please. Well, during this space, since we have several voices that we want to listen to, and of course, they are the protagonists, I will be strict with timekeeping, very strict, in fact. So each one will have 5 minutes. And when you have 2 more minutes to end, I will show you a piece of paper. And when you run out of time, I will show the other paper. I apologize. We would like to have a very long conversation with each one of you. But in this case in particular, we are very short on time. So let's start with Claudia. Thank you, Diana. First, I want to greet all of you, all of my colleagues, my friends from the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women. Another special greeting to Dr. Camilo Maña, Vice Minister of Justice, Diego Olarte, Director of Criminal Policy, you for inviting us and moderating this space, Claudia, and of course, Senator María José Pizarro, that has spoken with us and talked about her life experience. I will be brief. We need to say that we are celebrating that we are here today, and we held our first meeting of formerly incarcerated women here in Bogota. We had been planning it for many years, many months, and today, finally it became a reality. We have more than 60 women seated here from 20 countries around the world. And I thank you for having accepted our invitation. On social networks, we said it was going to be from the 2nd to the 4th of May. But since April 28th, you have been arriving to Bogota and we have been meeting. So this meeting was not only 3 days. Since past Friday, we have been coming together and meeting each other. We have received women like you that are powerful and that represent many other women around the world. We celebrate this historical international meeting because we represent a new network that wants to contribute to global solidarity, to support the women that are incarcerated, and of course, those that were formerly incarcerated, to elevate our voices and their voices. We need to be protagonists. We also need to make our stories and our experiences of incarceration be worthwhile. Also, those experiences and all the ideas regarding incarceration, this is an intersectional network that includes those that identify themselves as women and LGBTQI+, Black women and Indigenous women. During this meeting, we shared experiences and advocacy strategies. We want to work together and we have come together and for a couple of years with one single purpose, which is to end the incarceration of women and children around the world. Girls around the world. Of course, we need to change the criminal policy of all the countries, but that is our purpose, abolitionism. We don't want prisons in our planet and in our world. Claudia, thank you very much for that general presentation. And now I will give the microphone to Ana Tony. We have other microphones here on the table. Te confunde. Lo coges tú.
She's speaking Portuguese, so good evening, everyone. Good evening, everybody. The voices of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women is important. Governments change, but invariably disrespect the Bangkok rules about dignified and human treatment.
However, applying torture, desensitize, and after having a sentence of incarceration, prejudice appears in a restless manner. The absence of social and mental health services, employment, education, and documents. Because of the total absence of public policies. They have also denied free traveling through borders, which makes it more difficult to organize ourselves as a social movement.
Os governos investem milhões de dinheiro para a manutenção do encarceramento, mas suprimem investimentos essenciais para que possamos ter as oportunidades necessárias de uma vida humana com as nossas famílias.
Governments invest millions of money to maintain incarceration, but suppress essential investment so that we can have the necessary opportunities for a dignified life with our families. Democracy is a constant movement that requires new perspectives and narratives for its consolidation. No more life sentences. Thank you, Ana, for your words. Now, our second representative of this network, in this case, well, we have Trisha and Debbie. 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Debbie Kilroy, and I'm from Australia, from an organisation called Sisters Inside. Before I speak tonight, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we gather on, the Miscus people of Bakatah land. I'd like to show my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge that I reside on unceded, stolen land of Aboriginal peoples, a land called Meanjin, and pay respects to those elders back at home, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. I also like to acknowledge all my sisters inside that we met today in one of the Colombian prisons, and all of my sisters outside here tonight. Since the colonisation of the country where I reside, now called Australia, that ongoing genocide continues for Aboriginal people. They were herded up, murdered, and put on missions. And now those new missions are called prisons. Aboriginal people in my country make up 3% of the population, but Aboriginal women make up nearly 40% of the prison population. And this has been going on for hundreds of years. They are targeted by the racial gendered violence of many carceral systems, the family policing system, the police, the courts, and the prisons. This is what we call the prison industrial complex, and that we demand that the prison industrial complex must be abolished now. Today, we had the honour to go into one of the women's prisons here in Colombia and sit with our sisters inside and hear their individual stories of trauma, just as the Senator shared tonight on the stage of her parents, Senator, and your auntie, and yourself going to that prison. So we see from generations on that the mass incarceration continues, and reform never does anything other than net wide and captures more women and girls and children and causes more harm. Those stories that I heard today, and I'm sure everybody else with me, those individual women's stories were my stories, were our stories from every country that's here and every other country that I've been around the world. Our stories are the same. So I wasn't shocked about the prison system. I wasn't shocked about who was in the prison, because those women are my sisters and we have the same stories. And this is the tentacles of the prison industrial complex that must be abolished. It's seeped through every country of this world, and we need this country, I encourage, to stand up now with courage and be the leader of the world and demand the end of incarceration for women. You can be the leaders. You can start dismantling, not reform, reform net widens, decarcerate and abolish. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Trisha Walsh and I come from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am a Maori wahine. I was born on a land where 180 years ago, we were the owners. We didn't own the lands, we were stewards of the land. It was our right to take care of the land and its resources for our children and their children and their children. There was no ownership. We were one with the land. Colonizers came and they took, and through friendship, they stole everything from us. They stole our culture. They beat our language out of us. So now I speak English. I don't speak my native tongue. They stole our land. We are homeless in our land. Our tribal housing is in the prison walls. We are 15% of New Zealand now. Our men make up 58% of the prison population and our women 68%. I want to remind us, all of us, everyone who's in this room and everyone who's listening, that you were each growing in a woman's womb. This is where you started your life. But we continue to lock away our women at a rate, an unspeakable and unthinkable rate. Like my sister Debbie, I demand that we be courageous, ruthlessly courageous, that we tear down the walls that stop us from being the best version of ourselves. I went through a state system from the age of 12, the government decided that they were going to put me in a state care. And I was raped in that place. I was placed in solitary confinement where the guards had their way with me every night. At the age of 15, I was placed in a prison where the guards had their way with me whenever they felt like it. We were treated like animals, and in turn, we turned on each other because that's what it took to survive. After I left prison, I left with my record stopped me from getting an education, from finding housing. I had all these conditions to meet where I was reminded every day that I was less than anyone else. My value was less than anyone else. They went after my children. We were seen as a crime family because of crimes of poverty, because I stole to feed, to put food on the table. I used cannabis because it helped me to sleep at night. It helped me to forget the men that would come in and out of my cell uninvited and take things from me that it took a lifetime to put back together. Because I was a woman and because I had my voice taken away from me. Reminding us that everyone in this room grew inside a womb, just like my children grew within mine. So what I want to remind us of is we have the strength to make courageous decisions, ruthlessly courageous decisions about ending the incarceration of Indigenous, non-Indigenous women around the world. Kia waiata, kia María, hene whakai, whakametia mai, he whare tangata. Hene purotu, hene ngako, hene rangi Marie. O te whaia, o te whaia, o te ao. I just want to, just on behalf of my sister, say just remind us of every woman who has lost a child while she's been incarcerated, every woman who has lost a loved one and a family member. This is for you.
Trisha y Debbie, muchas gracias.
Tricia and Debbie, thank you very much for really putting at the center of this conversation the specific experience of Indigenous peoples and First Nations. Thank you very much. I'll now give the floor to Valerie Sommer.
Is Valerie Sommer. I'm a coordinator in an organization called Afro Resistance, and I thank you for this opportunity. And I will speak for the LGBTQ plus community. Violence and generalized discrimination that excluded the LGBTQ plus community focuses constantly on human rights because respond to structural, political, family, cultural, social, and uses and costumes of each region that have not been approached by society in general, and even less by states and governments of each country. That has affected and impacted this population, placing it in spaces of margination and vulnerability that justifies violence committed against this population. Being in this place of vulnerability and margination, the social, cultural impact and economic impact that they face is what makes us be so close to committing crimes, as drug trafficking, drug use, irregular work, informal or irregular jobs where we need to commit crimes because we have few opportunities. And the reality of margination puts them away from governments and public institutions because these don't recognize the specificities of this population. So those drug addicts, those prostitutes, let's stay away from them because we don't know how to approach them. That generalized violence has guaranteed that life expectancy of trans population, for example, is 35 or 4 years only, and that is internationally. There are countries where life expectancy is even lower. And that happens because identities of trans people are treated with stigma that naturalize cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment that go criminalize and make them affect them. There are other orientations, identities, and expressions. In other words, a lesbian Afro woman, an indigenous gay person, or Black trans woman that lives in the streets, or a lesbian that is a sexual worker, will experiment more violations to human rights when you add racism, sexism, and the criminalization violations to the rights of this community increases conditions of inequality, placing them in scenarios of irregular incarceration. And when I was a minor and being a very visible person, because of my diversity, I was incarcerated by some policemen that just kept looking at me because I stole. I stole at a self-service. Because I needed it, I was captured. I was able to escape, but from then on, escaping was worse because they started to pursue me in the neighborhood until they captured me one day. I was 13 years old. They took me to the police station that was right in front of the jail in my city, where they sent the prisoners directly to jail. And I was a minor. They beat me up. The guards beat me up because I had escaped the first time. And that wasn't the worst. They didn't let me call my mother. They locked me up in a cell with the worst men that could have been captured there. And I was sexually abused for more than 24 hours because my status as a minor was never, ever recognized. That was breathtaking for me because I had never had sexual relations and I had to do it. I had to let them do that because the man that looked at me was the worst man in that cell. In other words, that was why I was protected from the others raping me. That experience, to talk about that experience, is still difficult. And I thank the space to Mujeres Libres for this space because I have felt safe and comfortable to speak about this. And especially the most important thing is that I feel that this space helps build support networks. And this is something that we need. Precisely because of that, we're completely abandoned inside the prisons and in society in general. If we don't have support networks, if people don't analyze that we are human beings, LGBTQI plus people are human beings. We deserve to be seen as people with human rights as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for your courage with which you tell us about your experience and the courage that you also express in all your actions of activism for the defense of rights. I am speechless. I would now like to give the floor to Susan Kigula. Susan?
Good evening, everyone. I am Susan Kigula from Uganda. I was in prison for 16 years, and I'm the only one here who was sentenced to suffer death by hanging. I studied law from prison, and when I came out, after becoming a lawyer, I have continued in the activism, in the Free Her campaign, and in the abolitionist movement against the death penalty. I'm going to discuss a topic about women crossing borders after incarceration. Crossing borders when you have a criminal record is problematic. This is continued punishment and discrimination. We do believe that when one serves their sentence, they have already paid the price. But when crossing borders becomes an issue, it is pure discrimination and traumatic to us. And thus, this is a hindrance to our movement as a Free Her movement. When one holds a passport from any of our African countries, the punishment doubles as we face lots of scrutiny, discrimination, rejection, and victimization, even after acquiring visas. For example, our colleagues from Sierra Leone were prevented from boarding the Turkish Airlines just because they did not have financial requirements, which were waived by the government of Colombia, who granted us all visas. Even when all the requirements were met, still Turkish Airlines refused them to travel. Another example is our sisters from Zambia who spent 2 days at the airport of Istanbul just because they were required to have a code besides a visa. Finally, a code was sent, but again, they wanted to verify the code and they again were denied to travel. On the third attempt, they were allowed to board and yet no one checked the code. So we implore the Colombian government to cross-check her relationship with Turkish Airlines and also find out what issues Turkish Airlines has with Africans holding Colombian visas. I will continue to assert that when we are free, we need to be free. So free her and let her be free for real. Thank you.
Gracias, Susan. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for this invitation to remember that freedom is a struggle every day. We will now hear the next speaker, who will be done by Andrea James.
I got it. Good. Sorry about that. I was out of order. Oh, I can't get my thing on. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. I want to just say thank you to the Colombian government for providing what no other government in the world would do for us. We have been attempting to convene our sisters, irregardless of COVID,
which was a major obstacle and challenge, but we have organizing and been planning and working on this for almost 4 years. So I want to say thank you very much to bring more than 24 countries, 16 countries into a space for our first international convening was no short feat. And we want to say thank you very, very much for recognizing the importance of this. My name is Andrea James, and I am the Executive Director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. We are based in the United States, and we started our organizing inside of a federal women's prison in 2010. For the past 12 years, we have unapologetically been an abolitionist organization working to end the incarceration of women and girls. I assure you that we are much more than the messy parts of our lives and the stories that we have come to give you just a little bit of a taste of. We are powerful women with a powerful message and a powerful mission. Again, the mission is to end globally the incarceration of women and girls, grandmothers, mothers, daughters, aunties who are held in bondage in these places that they call prisons, like the one we visited in Colombia today, where their stories that we heard from all of the women that were in the prison speaking to us are all of our stories. And it is a true testament, no matter where we have traveled around the world as a national council and visited in women's prisons around the world. It is a true testament to the failed carceral system that must be abolished. But for the criminalization of poverty in the world, women would not be in prison. But for a war on drugs and the policies of that war that have been disseminated across the globe, mostly because of the policies that my country in the United States has created. So as the member representative of the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women from the United States, it is our responsibility to work on policy correction so that we can bring an end to the failed drug war policies, to the failed policies that hold the narrative that prisons create healthy, thriving people. They do not. Prisons disrupt, cause further harm, cause further deeper economic disruption in the lives of the people who are entangled in the criminal law systems in every country. So I implore you all to understand again, think and listen beyond the stories that we tell you about the very difficult challenges in our lives, and listen to the brilliance of these women in this international network who are working on the issue of ending incarceration of women and girls. Thank you very much.
Andrea, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for reminding us of the fact that there is a huge impact of drug policies on such a dramatic situation of incarcerated women and girls. It's a very important and powerful message with which I would like now to give the floor to the person who will close this round of presentations of the International Network of Women, which is Rosma.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of incarceration women in the world, allow me to introduce my name. My name is Rosma Carlina. I am also an incarceration woman for 3 years for drug offenses. I have to talk about situation prisons in the Asia. We have the same situation in Malaysia, Indonesia, Myanmar, China. We have overcrowded incarceration people in the prison. In our country, there is a 280,000 people incarcerated and 50% is women. And let me talk about change narrative. We must change narrative statement against women. It's the role of the government and the mainstream media and respective countries to change the narrative campaign message that have destroyed the life of many women of the year in the prisons. The best source of knowledge about what women need in order to feel safe is the woman ourselves. Effort to counter stigma and misinformation and to change public perception are important. How we respond to something, it will become our power to our weakness. We have to build foundational self-work over time in order to be proactive rather than reactionary. And the last, I just want to say that women's rights are human rights. So if government, if state do not provide our right in the prison, don't prisoner us, free her. Thank you.
Rosma, thank you very much also for ending this part of the presentation of the network with this powerful message. We need to change the narratives, and we have to do it from your voices. The women that have gone through the human drama of being incarcerated and that are collectively fighting to transform the reality of women that are still incarcerated, women and girls that are still incarcerated in different countries. This panel that for me has been very powerful and moving, has shown us that this is a global problem, not only a problem faced by individual countries, but a problem that we need to understand as a global problem. That is why this international network is particularly powerful, not only because of the exchange that allows between you, but also because precisely this is a big seed to think of ways of resistance and transformation that we deeply need with regards to this topic that is so painful, but is so extended over the world. So thank you all. And of course, all the other women in the network that without being present here at this meeting are finally the engine and the ones that are leading this struggle for this transformation. Thank you all very much, and a big round of applause for every single one of you women. So now we will go to our fourth moment of the event. And we have thought of this to be able to generate a reflection around how Colombia is facing this prison crisis. In particular, also to speak about one of the initiatives that for the first time, Colombia as a state commits to promote, which is the law of public utilities services. This is perhaps one of the first opportunities that Colombia has to truly stop one of the trends that, as we were saying, is not only local, but worldwide, to massively use criminal law as a strategy that ends up violating human rights. So I want to invite our Minister of Justice and Law, Dr. Nestor Iván Osuna Patiño. And what we are proposing in this part of the event is precisely to give Mr. Minister a couple of minutes his presence is very important here, not only in terms of the recognition of the work that these women are doing, recognition of the potential that the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women has, but it also allows us to situate this conversation in the context of Colombia, to locate it in this country where today we have this first meeting. So thank you very much. And I will give you the microphone, then Claudia will have the possibility of speaking to the audience again before closing the event. Mr. Minister. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here with you, to be here in front of you, to celebrate and to congratulate you for having held this event here in Bogota, in my country, in my city, and to express to you the commitment of the Colombian government with the change in the criminal and carceral policy that has existed in our country for many years, to build a policy that respects human dignity, that can give some sense of restoration and re-socialization to prison sentences, that can end that situation of severe violation of human rights that exists in Colombian prisons. I only have 10 minutes, so I will take 5 and 5 to talk about 2 ideas. The second one is the one you were mentioning about the draft law of the public utility services. But with the first one, we need your cooperation. We need the ideas of many women, hopefully women that have been victims of what I'm going to tell you. Our government of change, is designing a new drug policy for this country that hopefully in a while can become a new international drug policy. In that drug policy, this is what we are doing right now. We want to stop criminally chasing the 2 weakest links of the world of drugs, which is the link of consumers on the one side and the link of the growers, of the peasants that are the ones that are growing the coca leaf. That is accompanied by an international discourse headed by our president, Gustavo Petro, that calls to the attention on the failure of the drug discourse that has occurred during the last 50 years. But while we have these international changes, here we are changing the policy toward that non-criminalized treatment of the weakest part of the chain of the peasants that are the ones that grow the coca leaves or the other substances that are used to manufacture the drugs, and as well as the consumer link. So in the construction of that new drug policy, we have wanted to have the greatest participation, democratic and popular participation possible. We have had dialogue tables with coca leaf peasants around the country, also with people that are in the world of cannabis trading. But the most interesting one, I believe, and that I had the honor to attend on Monday this week, just the past Monday, is a meeting with women that grow coca leaves, women farmers, so that after their experience and their ideas, we can give this new drug policy a gender focus. But what is there? It really shouldn't matter who it is that is in this activity, because the evidence shows that the world of the big drug business is deeply masculine, deeply male-oriented. The big capos, the big mafia are almost all male. The big capital are handled by men. But behind them, there are almost always poor women that are the ones that have suffered incarceration much more than them. And besides incarceration, they suffer from displacement, a term that is probably only Colombian. They have had to abandon their lands, their territories with their families, or even worse, without their families, because they have had to face poverty, dispossession because of the drug problem. So that meeting last Monday gave us a lot of elements to design a policy that has this differential focus towards women farmers, growers of coca leaves mainly, or cannabis, or other different plants that are used to manufacture drugs. This is the first thing I wanted to tell you, the usefulness that meeting on Monday in an audience that was like this one.
And second, the Public Utility Service Law. I had the huge personal and professional, as well as political satisfaction to be able to adopt, together with the President of the Republic on March 8th, the International Women's Day, a Colombian law that we called the Utility Service Law, or the Criminal Alternative Law, which basically gives a complete twist in this policy. It's a law specifically oriented to incarcerated women. And it basically states that women who have been sentenced to jail, whose sentence is not greater than 8 years, or regardless of the amount of years, if it is for drug-related offenses, and if they committed those crimes in conditions of marginality and vulnerability, which is the case for almost all of them, can substitute the jail time by utility services, public utility services. So how will this work? We have public institutions as well as private public utility services who provide opportunities for public utility services, depending on the training or the capabilities of those women, nursing, any kind of job, or even sometimes simpler tasks that are just useful to society in general. The women who enter this program will come out of prison. They will freely live with their families while they commit themselves to carrying out this activity with an intensity of at least 5 hours per week. With 5 hours of public work, 1 week of the sentence is redeemed. One woman can also decide to work 10 hours per week, through which she will redeem 2 weeks of the jail time. Our objective is to only do 5 hours a week, so that for the remaining amount of time, these women can just work and be socially inserted and be involved in the workplace and look after their families. So we are full of hope concerning the good results of this law. We are convinced that the serving sentences through public utility services instead of jail is very useful to society. It will also be useful for the victims of the offense. It would also be useful for the families of those women and for themselves, of course. It will allow them to reintegrate quickly into society. When I say quickly reintegrate, I'm thinking, of course, about women about those women who will benefit from this law and who are now incarcerated, but maybe other women will be sentenced to jail in the future. But if they correspond to those criteria of drug-related offenses, sentences less than 8 years, and vulnerable economic conditions, they will not go to jail. They will enter directly the program of public utility services for a minimum of 5 hours a week, and they can thereby serve their sentence. This shows what the policy of the new government is in our engagement towards human rights with a differentiated approach that takes into account the specific situations of women, including criminal law, the respect of dignity, and what one of the panelists said minutes ago, that the origin of everything is in the womb of a woman, and we must all remember that, even when we design public policies. And also, something on which you can share with us wonderful lessons learned. And the government, of course, is responsible of designing policies in that sense. We must acknowledge that there is little or no utility in the prison system. It's very difficult in the world right now to propose abolitionist policies. It's almost a political suicide for a government, but we know that this line of thought exists. But beyond this line of thought, there is also experience and evidence through which you can say that this is useless, and that we can build a world in which abolitionism prevails, and that it's not only a discourse in forums and academia. So I thank you very much for inviting me. I am extremely proud of having been able to share this message to you, and I wish you a good evening. So in this event, and this is why Claudia will remain on stage, the idea of that space is also to sign an agreement with Mujeres Libres. And the idea is to carry out this this protocolary signature right now, so that we can make this partnership a reality. And thank you very much, Minister, for respecting the 10 minutes that were allotted to you. It was precisely 10 minutes. Thank you.
Mujer, detente, no bajes la frente, solo porque algunos te llamaron delincuente. Levanta tu rostro, eres buena mujer, y por mucho que insistan, justicia se va a hacer. Sonríe, canta y baila, eso el diablo lo ataranta. Nada es coincidencia, pero esta es nuestra esencia. Deja brillar tu luz, que ayude a otros con su cruz. Tu propósito en
Para quienes se conectan a la transmisión.
Those of us who are following us on Zoom, we are now lighting candles symbolizing all the departments of Colombia. We are taking a few minutes for that. And we will now proceed to the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding. I'd like to welcome Dr. Camilo Umaña, who is the Vice Minister of Justice, and he will come on stage with us for the signature of the agreement. Good evening. The Ministry of Justice and Law, under the leadership of Minister Osuna, has been working on the Public Utility Service law. We have visited different prisons where there are women incarcerated, and we asked them who they wanted to hug as soon as they came out. We invited them to imagine this hug with their children, their sons, their daughters, their mothers, the few people sometimes who visit these women in prison. In male prisons, the visit queue is longer than in women's prisons because often women are stigmatized and ignored. And so we would like to compensate this short queue by a lot of hugs and a lot of love for these women as soon as they come out of jail. But of course, as you all know, such a process requires the support of international partners. For the Ministry of Justice, it will be very important to advance the implementation of this law and make sure that women can return to society in a restorative way, in a wholesome way, that they could be symbols of peace in societies such as that of Colombia that suffers from so many conflicts. These women could symbolize a society that is ready to move towards restorative measures. So we'd like to give as a present to the whole network under the leadership of Claudia this poster. This is a poster where we commit ourselves as Ministry of Justice and Law to advance the implementation of this law and seek the relevant agreements to implement this law of public service utility. And we would like to invite you all the leaders of this process, to support us. Don't leave us alone in the implementation, but also please help us to give enough space for women to work. Help us making sure that these women are truly protected and embraced, and that they can really have a new opportunity. We really want to solve this historic debt of Colombia, and we'd like to do this with you. Welcome to this process, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister and Vice Minister. I would like to give the microphone to Claudia so that in a couple of minutes she can react. Well, the law of public utility services is an advancement for the region and for the world. It is not everything we want, because what we truly want is that no women in conflict with the criminal law goes to prison. But the law is the first step to implement gender focus in criminal policies. And it's also hope for many women that have seen their lives destroyed by their experience in prison. Prison does not re-socialize, it deceits, destroys lives, deteriorates family relationships, impoverishes women that go into jail, and deprives us of the right of even having a bank account. With this law, we want to give way to a deeper criminal reform that understands social problems and doesn't disguise them with public safety policies. From here, I call the judges of the Republic and the authorities to use this law, especially the judges that execute sentences to abolish patriarchal stigma when they enhance alternative measures to incarceration for women. If men are not judged for being fathers, we hope women are not judged with more severity for having children. We demand from our criminal system a better understanding of the conditions to lead us to be in conflict with the criminal system. My message to the judges: we are willing to accompany you so that you implement and sign the freedom of our colleagues that meet the requirements to use the law of public utility services. Claudia, thank you very much. With these words, we're approaching the end. But before that, I would finally like to invite Jenny Perez for a few more words before the official closing. She is the founder of Mujeres Libres, formerly incarcerated women, and activist for women, incarcerated women and formerly incarcerated women. Good evening. The women that are in prisons around the world demand to have access to the criminal or carceral benefits, that there are no barriers to freedom because of their behavior. Lastly, beyond whatever crime they have committed, I will read from the beginning. Women that are in jails around the world demand to have access to carceral benefits, that there are no barriers to freedom for their behavior. Lastly, beyond the crime they have committed, they don't even deserve to go to prison or being deprived of the possibility to have access to alternative measures. To maintain a woman without alternative measures to incarceration increases the injustice of the punishment. It is not fair that women spend many years in prison, and we demand freedom for all women, but in particular for those that are ill, that are older adults, or that are mothers. To maintain these women in prison is an unnecessary punishment. Just like keeping in prison older adult women, because that means that is the same as a life sentence in practice. We also demand support to the entrepreneurships of women that leave prison so that they can start their lives that have been severely damaged by their experience in prison. We women demand more opportunities and less punishment. We don't like prisons, but while we abolish the penitentiary system, we want dignified conditions for the women that are already in prison. We want good food, water, hygiene material, access to health, especially menstrual and reproductive health material. We want all incarcerated women to have access to sanitary pads when we need them. We want dignity for all those women that cannot be here. We all know of our rights as women, and that is why we are demanding them. That is why we want to be free women. Free. Free women. Free women. Free women. Mujeres libres. Jenny, thank you very much for that closing speech. It couldn't have been better, and it leaves our emotions ready for the glass of wine that we have next. We hope this is a very special moment for those that come from outside the network to have the possibility to meet the members of the network. And of course, this is a space for the international network, for a big round of applause for all of you. As part of the closing, we have music, but before that, we want an official picture, an official photo with the minister and the vice minister. So we have wine, but we will take one more photo, and we have a musical event as well. So we ask all you women to try to come more towards the center so that we can take the picture here. But you can stand like in a line at the front or towards, perhaps it's better towards the back of the room so that we can see the whole room if you stand towards the back. I think we still need a couple of you, so please step forward towards the rest of the group so they can take the picture. So before the wine, Kenya is going to sing for us. So we're moving the chairs and the table so that she has all the space, but we're going to ask her to step up on stage. come up. Please sit down so that Kenya can come up to the stage and we can all hear her sing. We need one of the small, we're missing one of the small mics, please. One of the small microphones is missing, so if anybody sees it, please bring it up front. And one last favor, let's please sit down so that Kenya can start singing.
Kenia, todo tuyo.
Yo no sabía que en esta fiesta tan contento te vería y que estarías tan distante de mis cosas, acompañado y del brazo con la otra. Yo no sabía que este momento de encontrarnos llegaría y que de celos yo por ti me moriría. Tú no me miras por temor a adelantarte o amargarte. Óyeme bien, dile a esa otra que aquí se porte bien, que no se atreva y que sepa quién es quién, que donde hay dos es imposible que hayan tres. Óyeme bien, no te me acerques, te lo digo por tu bien. Te estás pasando, te lo digo de una vez. Aunque me mueras, yo te juro serte infiel. Te estás pasando. Mucho cuidado que con fuego estás jugando. Que se descubra que tu amor me está matando. Y que mis ojos hoy te están recriminando. ¿Qué está pasando? Yo quisiera que tú me estuviste amando. Y además, tu mujer te está engañando. ¿Qué está pasando? Mucho con fuego está jugando. Que se descubra que tu amor me está matando y que mis ojos hoy te están recriminando. No quisiera que tú me estuviste amando. No te pacientes. Tu mujer te está engañando.
¿Cómo está Colombia? How are you, Colombia? Mujeres Libres. Now I need you to help me sing this song, which is an icon of women. It's a song by Lupita D'Alessio that it's called Mudanzas, Changes. Maestro.
¿Le pueden subir un poquito más el volumen? Me ayudan a cantarla.
Please help me sing.
Hoy voy a cambiar, revisar bien mis maletas y sacar mis sentimientos y resentimientos todos. Hacer limpieza al armario, borrar rencores de antaño y angustias que hubo en mi mente para no sufrir por cosas tan pequeñitas. Dejar de ser niña, ser mujer. Hoy voy a cambiar, sacar a luz mi coraje, entregarme a lo que creo y ser siempre yo sin miedo. Bailar y cantar por hábito y ver claro en vez Dios, poder arraigar mi secreto. Dejar de vivir, si no es por vivir la vida, que gritar en vivir. Voy a cambiar, salir dentro de mí, no se exploró corazón. Dejar y para el fracaso, soltar los brazos y libertad que oprime mi razón. Orar libre con todos mis defectos para poder rescatar mis derechos y no cobrarle a la vida caminos ni decisiones. Hoy quiero y debo cambiar. Dividir su madre al viento, toda la gaviota, pero femenina como una leona. Tranquila y pacificadora, pero bien irreverente y revolucionaria por opinión, porque soy mujer, con todas las diferencias que nacen de mí, con el sexo de mí. Hoy voy a cambiar, revisar bien mis maletas y sacar mis sentimientos y resentimientos todos. Hacer limpieza al armario, borrar recuerdos de antaño y angustias que hubo en mi mente. Sufrir cosas tan pequeñitas, dejar de ser niña.
Las amo, chicas. Las amo. Gracias.
I love you, girls. I love you.
Bueno, pues Kenia Cuevas, muchísimas gracias.
Kenia Cuevas, thank you so much for such a wonderful show. We were going to do that at the beginning, but for several reasons, we are going to change the program. I would like to invite Jahel Quiroga. She's a human rights defender and also a politician in Colombia. She belongs to the Patriotic Union, and she was a survivor of the genocide of this organization. In the 2022 legislative elections, she was elected as a senator as part of the historic pact. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry that I am coming so late, but the agendas are a bit difficult sometimes. I'd like to say how pleased I am about this event that fills us with hope. And so we discovered this purpose through Claudia, who has wanted to find support and solidarity for those women who come out of jail, and then we don't know anything about them anymore. They are abandoned to their fate because the state does not protect them. There is also a lot of stigmatization against them. Their families have been abandoned for such a long time because there is no care system for the children and for the relatives of those women. So when I read the information about your event, that you come from many other countries, including Latin America, it fills me with hope. Because this struggle that is now starting must go all the way, because it's not only about those women who go to jail. I was precisely working on the case of a Colombian girl of 16, 17 years old who went to Moscow supposedly to study languages, but there she found a partner who was involved in micro trafficking, and she lent her cell phone to him, and he was captured, and she was captured too. In a country where, like any other countries, they can provide health conditions, and she must be brought home. But so I just wanted to say that because it's not, it's really about protection afterwards, protection of women from poverty and discrimination, protection from the lack of opportunities and public policies for employment of women who are in that situation. This is what is happening in this country with farmers. What can a farmer do here? They should, they often resort to growing coca. But this, unfortunately, always falls short of criminalizing the seller, but really criminalizes the producers. But I think the key struggle, Claudia, is to see how we can support entrepreneurship and employment of women for prevention. Because once you start being the light for many women, you will need advice and support to do that, because the situation is very difficult for women. Thousands of women in Colombia are selling drugs in the cities out of need. They are exposed to everything because the impact on women is huge. These women come out of jail full of stigma, and they struggle to find a job, to find support. So, Claudia, you can count on us, and you can count on this government. We will request from this government that they provide material conditions for women women who have previously been in jail, and in order to prevent the occurrence of those situations. Thank you very much, and sorry I spoke a little too much. A big hug to you all, and please count on us. Thank you, Senator. All right, we will now share a glass of wine and a closing, but please, women of the network, please stay 5 more minutes because we would like to take a final photo for posterity. The rest of you can go to the cocktail and also see what the women of the network will tell us. Thank you.